Wonderful Garden. There once lived two friends of the poor, Asan and Kasen. Asan cultivated a piece of land. Kasen grazed his small herd, and in this way they got their meager food. Both friends were widowers, but Asan had a beautiful and affectionate daughter, his consolation, and Kasen had a strong and obedient son, his hope. In one of the springs, when Asan was preparing to go to his field, Kasen suffered a misfortune. The steppe was struck by jute, and all the sheep of the poor man fell. Covered in tears, leaning on his son's shoulder, Kasen wandered over to his friend and said, "Asan, I came to say goodbye to you. My flock has perished, and without it I shall soon perish too." Hearing these words, Asan also began to cry, and pressing Kasen to his chest, he spoke, "My friend, half of my herd belongs to you. Do not refuse. Accept half of my field. Comfort yourself. Take a ketmen and with a song get to work." From that time, Kasen also became a farmer. Days went by, months went by, years went by. Once, Kasen was digging up his field and suddenly heard some strange ringing from under the ketmen. He hastily began to dig the earth in this place, and soon an old cauldron filled to the brim with gold coins opened up to his eyes. Being gripped by joy, Kasen grabbed a cauldron and rushed headlong to his friend's dugout. "Have fun, Asan!" he shouted on the run. "Have fun! Happiness has come to you. I dug a cauldron full of gold in your land. Now you are out of need." Asan greeted him with a friendly smile and answered, "I know your disinterestedness, Kasen, but this is your gold, not mine. After all, you found a treasure on your own land." "I know your generosity, Asan," Kasen objected, "but having present the land, you did not give me what is hidden in its depths." "Dear friend," Asan said, "everything that the earth is rich in short belonged to the one who watered this earth." They argued for a long time. Finally, Asan said, "Let's get over it, Kasen. You have a fiancé son, I have a bridge daughter. They have been in love with each other for a long time. Let's marry them and give them this gold. May our children not know poverty." When friends announced their decision to children, they almost died of happiness. On the same day, a merry wedding was celebrated. The young man and the girl settled in Kasen's dugout, and Kasen moved to Asan. The next day, just as it was beginning to get light, the young couple came to their father's dugout. Their faces were preoccupied, and in their hands they held a cauldron of gold. "What happened, children?" Asan and Kasen exclaimed anxiously. "What trouble got you up so early?" "We have come to tell you," answered the young people, "that it is not good for children to own that their parents neglected. We are rich without this gold. Our love is more precious than all the treasures of the world." And they put the cauldron in the middle of the dugout. Then the dispute began again, about who should own the treasure, and it lasted until all four decided to go with gold to one famous sage who lived far in the steppe. They walked through the steppe for many days, and then they came to the wagon of the sage. The wagon stood alone in the middle of the steppe. It was black and miserable. The travellers entered the wagon and bowed before the sage. The sage was sitting on a piece of shabby felt. Beside him, two on each side, sat four of his disciples. "What need has brought you to me, good people?" the sage asked those who came, and they told him about their dispute. After listening to them, the sage sat in silence for a long time, and then, turning to the senior student, he asked, "Tell me, how would you resolve the lawsuit of these people in my place?" The senior student replied, "I would order the gold to be taken to the Khan, for he is the lord of all the treasures on earth." The sage furrowed his brows and asked the second disciple, "Well, what decision would you make in my place?" The second student replied, "I will take the gold for myself, for what the litigants refuse rightfully goes to the judge." The sage frowned even more, but still calmly asked the question to the third student, "Tell us now, how will you get out of the difficulty?" The third student replied, "Since the gold belongs to no one and everyone refuses it, I would order it to be burned again in the ground." The sage became completely gloomy and asked the fourth, the youngest student, "What do you say, my child?" "Oh, my teacher," answered the younger student, "forgive me my simplicity, but here is my solution. I would grow a large and shady garden in this, with this gold in the empty steppe, so that all the weary poor people could rest and enjoy the fruits in it." At this words. The sage rose from his seat and embraced the young man with tears in his eyes. Those are truly right. Those are truly right, he says. Who says, consider older than yourself and the young if he is smart. Your judgment is fair, my child. So, take this gold, go to the Khan's capital, buy the best seeds there, and returning, go the garden you spoke about, and may the memory of you and these generous people who brought gold live forever among the poor. The young man immediately put the treasure in a bag and, throwing it on his shoulders, set off. For a long time he wandered across the steppe and finally safely reached the capital of the Khanate. Arriving in the city, he immediately went to the realtor and began to wander among the noisy crowd in search of merchants of fruit seeds. He wandered for a long time, looking at outlandish gimmicks and bright fabrics displayed near the shops. Suddenly, behind him, there was a ringing of caravan bells and piercing cries were heard. The young man turned around and saw an endless caravan loaded with amazing luggage was passing through the market square. Instead of bales of goods, live birds were loaded onto camels. Thousands of birds that only nest in the mountains, in forests, in the steppe, and in the desert. They were bowed by their paws, their wings rumpled and frayed, dangled like rags. Clouds of multicolored feathers curled over the caravan. With every movement of the caravan, the birds beat their heads against the camels' flanks, and lamentably cries emerged from their open beaks. The young man's heart sank at the sight. Pushing his way through the crowd of curious people, he approached the caravanbashi and, bowing respectfully, asked, "Sire, who doomed these beautiful birds to such a terrible torment, and where are you heading with them?" Caravanbashi replied, "We are on our way to the Khan's palace. These birds are intended for the Khan's table. Khan will pay us 500 tenge for them. Will you set them free if I give you twice as much gold?" the young man asked. The caravanbashi looked at him mockingly and continued on his way. The young man dropped the leather bag from his shoulders and opened it in front of the caravanbashi. The caravanbashi stopped, not believing his eyes but realizing what wealth they were offering him. He immediately ordered the caravanners to empty the birds. As soon as they felt freedom, the birds immediately soared into the sky. There were so many of them that in an instant the day turned into night. and from the flapping of wings a hurricane swept across the earth. The young man watched the departing birds for a long time, and when they disappeared from sight, he picked up an empty leather bag from the ground and set off on the way back. His heart rejoiced, his legs rushed lightly, a cheerful song flowed from his lips by itself. But the closer he came to his native places, the more bitter thoughts took possession of him, and remorse more and more took place in his chest. Who gave me the right to dispose of other people's wealth at my whim? Did not I myself volunteer to plant a garden for the poor? What shall I say now to the teacher and to those simple-hearted people who are waiting for my return with seeds? So the young man complained about itself. Little by little, despair completely took possession of him, and falling to the ground, he began to cry, calling days on his head. In the end, grief so exhausted him that he fell asleep soundly. And he had a dream. Out of nowhere, a lovely motley bird flew down on his chest and suddenly sang in a wonderful voice. "Oh, good young man, forget your sorrow. Free birds cannot return your gold, but they will reward you for your mercy in a different way. Wake up soon, and you will see something that will immediately dry your tears." Having sung like this, the bird fluttered and flew away. The young man opened his eyes and froze in surprise. The whole wide steppe was covered with marvelous birds engaged in an incomprehensible business. Birds raked deeply in the ground with their paws, dropped white seeds into them from their beaks, and again swept them with their wings. The young man stirred, and at the same moment the birds took off from the earth and rushed to the sky. And again the day turned into night, and from the flapping of wings a hurricane swept over the earth. But after that an even greater miracle happened. From every hole dug out by the birds, green sprouts suddenly stretched. They grew higher and higher and soon turned into mighty branch trees, luxuriously trimmed with shiny leaves. In less than a moment the branches of the trees were already covered with unseen lush flowers that filled the air with a sweet fragrance. Then the flowers flew around, and instead of them, magnificent golden apples swayed on the branches. Majestic apple trees, covered with bark, as if from amber, there was no number and count. Between their slender trunks, everywhere one could see fat vineyards, thickets of elaeagnus and apricots, bright lawns covered with lush grass, and bright tulips. The shady paths were lined with delicate flower petals that had just fallen from the trees. On the sides of the paths I see ditches lined with multicolored precious stones murmured loudly, and overhead birds fluttered and chirped incessantly, as beautiful and vociferous as the one that the young man dreamed of in a dream. The young man looked around in amazement and still could not believe that he was seeing the garden in reality. To test himself, he shouted loudly and clearly heard his own voice echoed many times over. The vision has not disappeared. Then he rushed with all his might to the sage wagon, and told there about everything that had happened to him. After listening to his story, both the sage and his 3 students and Asan with Kasen and their children wished to immediately see to the garden. To the garden. Soon the rumor about the wonderful garden spread throughout the steppe. The first to ride to the garden on their greyhound ambers were the horsemen of the white bone. But as soon as they reached the edge, a high fence with iron gates on 7 logs rose in front of them. Then they stood on carved saddles and tried to reach the golden apples through the fence. But any of them who touched the fetus immediately lost strength and fell dead to the ground. Seeing this, the horsemen of the white bone turned their horses in fear and horror and rushed off to their owls. Crowds of poor people followed them to the garden from all sides. As they approached, the logs fell from the iron gates and the gates swung open wide. The garden was filled with people, men and women, old people and children. They walked along the paths, trampling the petals, and the petals did not wither. They drank water from ditches, and the water did not become cloudy. They plucked fruit from the trees, but the fruit did not decrease. All day long the sounds of dombra, cheerful songs, loud laughter did not stop in the garden. When the time of night came and darkness descended on the earth, a soft blue light suddenly streamed from the apples, and the birds sang a quiet and sweet song. Then the poor lay down on the fragrant grass under the trees and fell into a sound sleep, contented and happy for the first time in their entire lives.